Today we're going to get back into Flowers, Feathers, and Animal Friends by Sarah Simon and tackle 3 of the pages that she has in the back. So if you joined me in the last video, we did some color swatches and some color recipes and just kind of an intro to the book. Today we are going to work on 2 of the pages together, and then I will do a follow-up video with the potted plant and the gnome. It's going to take a little bit longer, so I'm going to make it its own video. So if you saw last week's video, you saw the paints that I pulled out, and I did all of the color recipes that were involved, and it took several plates, and I even pulled out one of my paper palettes to work on to get all of those colors mixed. I believe it was 25 recipes, and it was a lot of fun. So be sure to go back and check that video out. But I found a palette in one of my drawers that I had actually forgotten about, but it has several different wells that I can work with on this project. So I haven't used it yet, so I thought I would pull that out. And so I went ahead and I got everything ready for the first watercolor page that we're going to work on. So this is Rose and Ladybugs, and as you can see, I pre-mixed some of the colors. So there's warm buff, and then the praline maroon just straight out of the tube, burnt rose, the praline violet. I mixed a eucalyptus green. I have titanium white, burnt sienna, yellow ochre, and those are straight out of the tube, and then the ivory black. So as I had mentioned before, these are on watercolor paper, and I'm just going to take it step by step. So it does say to get a round 4 brush. I have a round 6 brush that I'm going to go ahead and it's a Cotman brand that I'm going to use. It's just slightly bigger, but I think it will work just fine. So whatever you have on hand, you don't have to go out and buy a 4, but I think you'll still get the same effects. Okay, so I got my water ready, and I'm just going to take it step by step. So it says to add a little bit of the warm buff, the praline maroon, and the burnt rose into the flower. So I'm just going to begin to do that. The line work that Sarah has given us is kind of a gray tone, so it's not super dark, and that it's not like a black fine line, but it does give you the guides, obviously, that you can work within. Okay, and then I'm adding some of that praline, and that's just straight out of the tube. And you can see that with the wet on wet technique, it just kind of, all of the colors blend together, which is nice. And then adding in some of that burnt rose as well. I'm really trying to stay true to the example that Sarah has given us on the left-hand side. So just trying to kind of mock where the darks and lights are within her image. And I do feel like I have too much water pooling there in the middle, so I'm just going to pick some of that up. and then just start back in with the colors. I think one of the struggles here would be just the water control, and making sure that that wash is controlled. The next thing, it says to dab white titanium, the maroon, and the violet in. So I'm just gonna finish adding to some of those darker sections, making sure I have some good water control. You can see that it still blends because everything is still wet. And then I start adding that titanium white. Just lightening some of the petals up. One thing that is a little different for me is not staying true to the lines, and putting this wet on wet technique. Everything you can see kind of starts to smear together. So I would just be super aware of the water that you put down. If you take some of it off, you can still add in some of those lighter colors back in. I do like how everything is blending together nicely with the wet on wet technique. Just trying to maintain some of those dark folds within the petals while still keeping those highlights as well. The next step says to put the color into the Ladybugs. So I'm trying to be very careful, and just dabbing it right, directly on top of the ladybug that's illustrated on the page. And then I'm just going to let that dry. So with the green eucalyptus color, it says to, use another, wet on wet technique and drop those into the leaves. So that's what I'm doing here. And then also adding some ochre, some yellow ochre in as well. And then a little bit later, I'll add some ivory black. I tend not to use black, as I had said before, so that is a different approach for me. I usually use other colors on the color wheel to get the darker colors. So I'm just being very mindful, I guess you could say, when it comes to adding the black in. As you can see, I didn't go too dominant with those with the black, but I was being intentional about making sure that I got the stems darker in places and that kind of thing. But I do really like how the leaves turned out. I think I like how the leaves turned out even better than the flower itself. The next step is to go in and use the gray color that I mixed, and getting those wings of the ladybug and the little legs as well, which those were kind of hard, but it's there. Okay, now that the flower has dried, I'm going to go back in and just add a few of those colors back in, the burnt rose and the maroon colors, just so that they're still represented, because I felt like they just kind of, you know, blended in with the other colors, and I want them to still be on the page. And then I'm just going to let that dry, and then we're going to move on to the next one, the mushrooms. Overall, I really like how it turned out. I personally would be a little more detailed on the petals, so that was a little different technique for me, but it was fun to explore and play with something new. So next we're going to tackle the snails, or the mushrooms and snails. Again, I pre-mixed a lot of the colors, so it has cobalt blue hue, the warm buff, gray, the Payne's gray, which is right out of the tube, hydrangeas blue, the yellow ochre, straight out of the tube, golden, chocolate brown, and rose. So it says first that we're going to work on one snail and mushroom set, and then the next. So the first one, we're going to begin a wash with the cobalt blue. And I read this wrong. I started to go straight in with the blue and not the mixture. So I'm going to have to go back in and add some of the mixture later. But I really found it easy to, you know, follow the lines and the guides that Sarah gave us in her book. The next step says to give a wash on the stems and then add the color in. So basically a wet on wet technique. Here is where I added that mixture in so that I get more of that cobalt blue hue. You can see that it darkens it up a tad. But since it's still wet, I have plenty of time to get that color on there. With the next step, I'm going to add the gray color underneath the caps of the mushrooms. And this was a premix. It's basically titanium white and ivory black. Pretty straightforward, but just gives it some nice shading. The next step tells us to add some of that blush color to the body of the snail. And then while that dries, to put a wash over the shell and start to add in some of the blues and grays to create the shell itself. I did find that, of course, with the wet on wet technique, everything just kind of smears and blurs. So I went back in and removed some of that, pushed it around. It's basically the Payne's gray, the hydrangeas blue, which is like that greenish color, and the gray. And then I'll go back in with some more of that cobalt blue as well. And then we're going to darken up the body of the snail, giving it a little bit of dimension. Still trying to maintain good water control. Here is that hydrangeas blue going in. And then I'm going to begin working on the second mushroom and snail. So I'm going to go in with my yellow ochre, and I'm going to speed up the video because this is probably, it took a long time to paint. I was trying to stay within the lines. You don't have to stay within the lines, but that's just what I chose to do. And then I did another wet on wet technique. Dropping in some of that golden, which is so pretty, and then going back in with some more yellow ochre. And then adding the chocolate brown. The blush. And just working in to get those dimensions. So now that the other snail is dry, I'm going to go back in with that cobalt blue hue, and I'm going to add those lines in. Just blending everything out. So what I decided to do that was a little bit different from the flower is add my fine liner, my micron pen. I used a size 3, and I just went back through and I went back over the lines. If you've been watching any of my videos, you know that I love a good ink and wash, and this is an ink and wash in reverse where I did the wash and now I'm going to go in with the ink, but the same applies. It defines the areas, and you can bring those lines back to the surface of your artwork, and I really like how it turned out. I just think it gave it more definition, in my opinion. And then I was also able to go in and put the spots along the snail's body. According to Sarah's picture, it has little spots on the snail on the right-hand side. So I was able to do that with the micron pen, which, you know, is a lot easier than trying to do that with a paintbrush. So I really like how it turned out. I think it was a lot of fun to paint the mushrooms and the snails. So come back next week because I am going to do the potted plant, the garden gnome with the potted plant. And it's going to take me a little bit longer, so I'm going to leave it to its very own video. So I'd love for you to come back and watch that in the next video. But just seeing the two that I've done so far, I'm super happy with them. You can see that the line art, the fine liner helped. But also I just love the way that the flower blended together with that nice wash as well. So having fun with my new flowers, feathers, and animal friends. Watch the next video and we will be doing that garden gnome.